right, we're about to trace the path of a single idea, one that kicked off over a century ago because of a really desperate problem. And, well, it ended up completely reshaping how millions of people in Pakistan live, work, and build their communities today.
But this entire story, it really starts with a simple but very, very serious question. How do you escape a debt trap? Seriously, put yourself in this position. You're a farmer, your entire livelihood is in the hands of a single moneylender. What can you possibly do?
Well, over 100 years ago, an idea that had already taken root over in Europe made its way to the subcontinent, and it offered a pretty radical and powerful new answer.
So where did it all begin? Let's dive into Section 1. A rescue mission begins. The problem was simple, and it was devastating. Farmers were just caught in this endless cycle of debt to moneylenders, and anything had to change.
The answer was the cooperative. Now, the concept is simple but kind of revolutionary. A group of people, in this case farmers, joining forces for their own economic survival. And their first, most urgent mission? To break the grip of those moneylenders.
But you know, a powerful idea is just a dream without some way to make it real. And that brings us to Section 2, planting the legal seeds. This is the story of how that dream got a real legal backbone. So the legal journey starts out kind of slow, right? 1904, you get the first act. But then just look at the momentum. 1912 brings this huge expansion. By 1919, power starts to shift locally, which then paves the way for even more specific laws, like the one in Bombay in 1925. This isn't just a list of dates, it's the story of an idea really picking up speed. And right here, you can really see the difference just a few years made. The 1904 Act, think of it like planting a single seed. It was limited to just credit for farmers. So progress was slow. But the 1912 Act, that was like fertilizing the entire field. It opened the door to all kinds of self-help projects, giving the movement what they called a tremendous impetus for growth.
Now, this explosion of growth led to the next logical step. The movement just couldn't be run from a single central point anymore. It was time to put power to the provinces, kicking off a whole new decentralized approach. The key moment comes in 1919, when cooperation becomes a transferred subject. Now, that sounds like some dry, bureaucratic jargon, I know, but it was basically a political earthquake. It meant provinces could finally write their own rules that were tailored to their own people. And this created a massive ripple effect. Provinces jumped on this new power. Bombay's 1925 Act became the new gold standard. Decades later, the Sindh Act was praised for having many improvements. So decentralization wasn't just a policy, it was the engine for progress and adaptation. So how does a century-old idea manage to survive in the 21st century? That brings us to Section 4, adapting to modern times. Because, look, to stay relevant, it had to evolve to meet a whole new set of challenges. And that leads to a really critical question. The world changes, right? New industries pop up, society's needs shift. So what happens when the laws that worked so well back in 1925 just aren't enough anymore? Well, it turned out that the foundational 1925 Act, as revolutionary as it was for its time, had some pretty serious blind spots. It was designed for an agrarian society, and it just wasn't equipped for the complexities of a modernizing nation. Specifically, it was failing to cover huge, new areas of the economy. And the biggest blind spot of all? The booming cooperative housing sector. The law was basically stuck in the past, while the country was busy building a new future. And then a surprising new player entered the scene, the Financial Action Task Force, or FATF. And suddenly, the pressure to update wasn't just local anymore. It was international. Global financial standards were demanding a change. This international pressure is what triggered a huge legal overhaul in 2020. It was a clear four-step process. First, they had to align with those global FATF standards. To do that, they needed to implement national reforms. And that meant, finally, amending both the original 1925 Act and the 1927 rules to drag them into the modern age. So after a century of evolution, legal reforms, even international pressure, what does this all actually mean today? This brings us to the real impact: cooperatives in your life.
Today, the movement is often described as a world in itself, having unity in diversity. And that's a perfect way to put it, really. It's not just about farming anymore. It now touches almost every single corner of the economy.
And this chart really shows you just how vast that ecosystem has become. What's incredible here is that housing, which wasn't even a major factor in the original laws, now makes up the largest slice. Agriculture's still there, for sure, but so are banking, industry, and even sectors dedicated to women's empowerment. It's a completely different world. And the impact of that housing sector is just hard to overstate. These cooperatives are building entire communities from the ground up, providing homes and infrastructure, all without seeking any financial support from the government. That level of self-reliance is an incredible contribution. So if we just step back for a second, the journey of this idea is pretty remarkable. It was born from a crisis to rescue farmers. It evolved right alongside a nation, adapting through local laws. And today, it powers modern life, fueling everything from where people live to how they bank. Which brings us to our final thought. An idea that has survived and thrived for over a century by constantly adapting to change is bound to face new hurdles. So the question isn't if it will change again, but how. What new challenges will the cooperative movement need to solve next?